So, welcome back to the Last Roll of the Week podcast with Red Dice Diaries. I'm your host, John, and this is Hannah.
Hi.
And today we're going to talk about potentially lethal combat in RPGs and how you can prepare for them. First of all, though, we've got the music, and then we've got a voicemail to answer.
John and Hannah, it's Evil Jeff. Been going through your RPG a day a week for 2025, and I wanted to say I had this thought before I got to the renew episode where Hannah was like, hey, give us a message. Been thinking about it since probably the third or fourth episode that y'all put out, that I've really enjoyed having both of y'all behind the mic, talking to each other. Nice little level of enthusiasm, good banter back and forth. So it's been great hearing you back on the mic, John and Hannah, after a good period of time there. So I look forward to see if y'all keep putting out more content after RPG Day 2025 is done. And at some point, I will be back behind the mic too. I just don't know when. You know how life gets and work and other things. But hearing you guys on the mic gives me that itch as well to get back as well. Anyway, y'all have a good evening, and we'll listen to you again later.
Hi, Jeff. Nice to hear from you as well.
Yeah, thanks very much for the call. Very much appreciated. Glad you've been enjoying the RPG a day episodes. Obviously, we've had fun recording them.
Yeah, it's been lovely to get back to it, and hopefully we will do a few more, although we're not going to be sticking to a regular schedule as such.
Yeah, we're thinking like maybe a couple of episodes a month or something like that, aren't we?
We'll put stuff out when we've got stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when I say sort of like once or twice a month, that's like very much a sort of finger in the air, pulling a figure out of my backside.
We've both just got new job roles, so yeah, we'll see how we cope.
Yeah, like you say, Jeff, life gets very hectic, as we all know. But, you know, we'll try and put something out as and when we've got something to say. And I look forward to hearing whatever stuff you put out in the future, whenever you put it out. Thanks very much for the call. I'm glad you enjoyed the episodes. Right, so the main subject of this episode, we're going to be talking about sort of lethal situations in RPGs, how people can get into them, how you can potentially prepare your player party and such like for them. And this came to my mind recently, where in my WFRP campaign that I'm running at the minute, not the Enemy Within one, the second edition campaign that I'm running for a group of our friends from LARP, they've got themselves into a situation last session where effectively they disrupted a chaos worshipping carnival of Nurgle worshippers who were sort of enacting this horrendous sort of ritual, a sort of plague dance ritual under the guise of a festival. You know, there was a whole like tower bell ringing, and every time it rung, the stuff got worse and people were getting entranced by it Pied Piper style. They stopped it, but that then left them sort of confronting like the carnival and their beastman allies who were coming out of the nearby forest, who were planning on basically ransacking the town while everyone was entranced by this ritual. Obviously now there's the player characters, a handful of sort of ill-equipped villagers against this carnival of Nurgle worshippers and lesser demons, and these are all sort of things from a pre-written book, one of the Ubersreich Adventures books from Cubicle 7, and it's all like a sort of pre-gen scenario, but they're now facing these monsters. It includes chaos worshippers, a sorcerer, demons, beastman, and there's a handful of ill-equipped and mostly elderly villagers, and the player characters. Now, the player characters are quite experienced, but the combat in WFRP is quite swingy, and, you know, with a couple of, like, bad rolls or a couple of critical hits, this situation could very easily go against them, and it could be pretty lethal. Now, thus far, we've not had any, like, character deaths in the campaign. You know, there's been a few times where it's come close, and they've had to permanently burn their fate points to avoid it, which now means they haven't really got that many left to avoid it if it happens again. And I'm sort of looking at this and thinking, oh, this could be a a pretty lethal situation the first really of the game, when I'm like, if things go bad, it could be a TPK potentially. So I started to think a little bit about how I might deal with that in the game and get people ready for it.
So obviously this isn't something that's usually a problem for you, because normally your games tend to be quite lethal, and it's very rarely a problem for me because my games tend to be non-lethal.
Yeah.
I tend to give my player characters a huge pile of weapons and say, what are you going to do with that then? Whereas you, as someone who's more experienced with those sort of dungeon type games, tends to have things quite well balanced to begin with, so they don't come up so often.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only thing in this particular game is, like, say in WFRP you have fortune points and fate points. Mm-hmm. And fortune points you spend and you get them back like at the start of every session to get some rerolls. However, if you choose to permanently burn them as fate points, you can like spend one of them to be like, oh, I survived somehow, but I'm out of this scene. And we've had that happen a few times, but when you do that, they're gone. And they're sort of getting pretty low on that resource now.
So, I suppose what I'm really asking is, why is it a thing in this game particularly? Why are you bothered? You wouldn't normally be.
No, I think the reason I'm sort of a bit bothered about it in this game is because normally, as you say, I run sort of OSR games where you're a first level mage with like 4 hit points. Like a strong breeze can take you out at first level. And normally you have a couple of sort of low-level character deaths. Everyone knows not to be like really too attached to their characters, and you sort of get used to it. It's the expectation of the game. Whereas I think because the players in this game, and I might be wrong, because they've got to this stage where the characters survive lots of stuff being thrown at them, although sometimes just because I've got like poor dice rolls and they've got good ones, they're now at the stage where they're sort of, yeah, we're pretty experienced. We've got like a few different careers under our belts. Oh, I'm going to try and become a Knight of Bretonia. I'm going to try and become this. I'm going to try and become that. So I think the first death we have in the game might be quite jarring.
So you feel like the players are more invested in the characters than they usually are in a game, and you're worried they're going to get upset.
I'm not so...
Or maybe John's going to get upset if he kills them.
That's definitely not that. But no, it's not a case of I'm worried about them getting upset, because I think they'll sort of take it in their stride. I just think it might be like a bit of a shock when it first happens. Because like I said, up until now, they've always had like, oh, I've got a couple of fate points in my back pocket. I don't need to worry about it too much. I can be a bit more gung-ho. Whereas I think now the fate points are starting to run dry, and they're like, oh shit, the next combat that goes against me, that could be it for this character. They're starting to be a little bit more cautious, but not too cautious, because they're still sort of bouncing into combats. And I think once they actually sort of come a cropper with that, it's going to be like sort of dashing cold water in their face, and they're going to be a bit like, oh, okay, now.
So maybe they've got a bit overconfident about things.
Yeah.
And I mean, bearing in mind the player group, I don't think it'll be a major problem for anyone.
No, I think you're absolutely right, sweetie. I just think it's a case of, because of how the game's worked up until now, it's sort of almost given them a false sense of security, because they've had these resources they can call on and whatever, whereas in the sort of OSR games, you don't have that to fall back on. You know it's deadly, whereas, like I say, up until the resources start running out, you can fairly always be certain if you've got a few fate points, you're going to escape permadeath in WFRP.
So is this a thing where maybe giving them an opportunity to get some more of those fate points before going into that final battle would be a good idea? I understand why you might not want to.
Yeah, I'm a little bit wary of that, because you're only really supposed to get a fate point when you do something like really like mega significant or sort of like heroic. And they have like gained a couple during the game, but they've then burnt them, which is fine. That's what they're there for. They're a resource to be used. But up until now, they've sort of every combat they've been in, they've been like, oh, well, if it goes really bad, I've got a fate point. I'll burn that, and like, okay, I might be out of that scene, but my character will be fine. Whereas now they're getting sort of down to like the bottom of the barrel, and like I said, they've got through a few other combats purely because they could have gone bad, purely because I've got shit dice rolls, they've got good dice rolls, and it feels like they've sort of breezed through it, but only due to the luck of the dice. Whereas we've had other combats where the monster's got a critical hit on someone, and suddenly it's, well, we had one with Jay's Ranger. He was fighting away, it was all going great. Oh, a monster's got a lucky critical hit on you. Oh, he's cut your leg off. And suddenly you're like, oh, I'm lying on the floor, I'm missing a leg, I'm bleeding to death. What am I going to do? Luckily, he was like, oh, I burned my only fate point. Oh, I managed to tourniquet it before I passed out, and the monsters thought I was dead. There you go, that's fine. You wake up afterwards and you crawl your way back to your thing. But now he's not got any fate points. Someone gets a crit on him again. That could be Good Night Vienna or whatever the old world equivalent is.
So the way I see it, all you can really do is remind the players at the start of the session that this is probably going to be a lethal game, and that their characters have spent a lot of their fate points.
Yeah, that's pretty much the way I'm planning on handling it. I'm going to take 5 minutes at the start of the session, which is in a couple of days' time as we're recording this. Although when this goes out, it'll actually be on the evening of the day this goes out. I'm planning to spend sort of 5-10 minutes at the start of the session saying, like, right guys, this is the situation you're in. Not going to lie to you, it's a potentially very lethal situation. I might even go through with them how many fate points each of them have got, so like they're not sort of labouring under the delusion, oh, I've still got a fate point, so they've forgot they've spent them. So if I go through and be like, alright, you've got 1 fate point, the rest of you've got 0 or whatever, and I'll be like, it is a potentially lethal situation, I'm also going to have a conversation at the same time with them, basically saying, right, okay, so let's say one player, their character dies. What do we then want to do? Do we then want to have them gen up a new player character who joins the party? We carry on with the scenario as it is. We can talk amongst ourselves, work out what sort of player character would fit in, maybe tie them into a bit of the story or whatever. Like, for instance, they've been doing some deals with some of the dwarves of the Grey Mountains. Maybe they want to play a dwarf of the Grey Mountains. Whatever, we can work something out. But I'm also going to say, what if we do have a TPK? What if everyone dies in this combat, or like everyone but one person dies in this combat? Do you then all want to gen up characters, and we'll then have to come up with a reason for an entirely new party to come in? I'm not saying we can't, but we'll have to come up with a reason for that. We'll have to think about it a bit. Maybe even have the next session be, let's gen up the new characters, let's work out how we're going to do this. Or if you all die, do we want to bin it off and start something else?
But yeah, certainly a good time to tell your players to start thinking about a backup character idea.
Yeah, exactly.
And hope that 1 or 2 of the old guards survive long enough to carry the game over.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I've done is we have like a Discord for communicating and running the game in. So, like the audio visual. So I've also put a message in there to them saying like, oh, you know, in case your character does die, maybe like have half a mind to like what you might like to play next. So I'm hoping that in that way, I've sort of prepared them for the worst. Because I've already told them, like, I'm not going to deliberately try and go out of my way specifically to kill your characters, but you're fighting against demons and chaos cultists and beastmen. If they get an opportunity to shank you, they will do, but I'm hoping I can lessen the shock a bit by sort of preparing them.
See, again, with this particular player group, I don't think it's going to be a problem.
No, I'm sure it won't be.
I'm also aware that like a lot of people that might be listening to this might be dealing with much younger player groups than the one you've got, particularly people where it's their first character that gets killed in a game, and how to cope with that. And aside from like reminding people that there is an option for your character to get out of this alive, even if it's just walk away, your best bet is to just remind people it's a character. That's how their story ends, but it doesn't mean you can't go back and revisit their story if you want to.
Well, that's it. And I mean, one of the phrases I always like in RPGs is the plot is just whatever the characters do in the game, or whatever happens in the game. So if these characters die here, the sort of overall story doesn't necessarily end. Even if we pick up with an entirely new party, the story of the campaign then becomes, oh, this one group went out, they got killed, and then the sort of torch was picked up by this other group of characters who went out and carried it on. But by the same token, if the players are all like, oh, actually, we've been playing Wolf for a while, we maybe fancy trying something else, oh, here's a good juncture to just sort of end it and go, yeah, it was unfortunate, they died, that was the end of the story, we'll maybe try something else, maybe come back to it in future, maybe not. I'm also fine with that. So I think for me, the the sort of preparing them for it is less necessarily about they're going to be bothered about the characters dying or a TPK or whatever. It's more a case of looking to the point of, if it does happen, are we prepared with what we want to do next, and finding out what the players want to do next. Because I'd hate for, if there was a TPK, like I say, it is going to be a bit of a shock, but I'd hate for to then maybe have to say, like, right guys, well, all your characters have binned it, you're ready to gen up some new ones and we'll jump straight back into the story. If they're thinking like, oh, actually, let's try something different for a bit, you know, or whatever. I'd rather sort of have that knowledge beforehand, so if the worst does happen, we all sort of know the direction we're heading in, rather than having to scramble around when everyone's a bit like, oh, well, I didn't expect to get my head chopped off by a plague bearer, oh, you know. So I think that would be my sort of summarisation for me for, you know, talking about how to prepare people for these potential lethal encounters. And I know it's a bit of a sort of trope, you know, but talk to your players about it. Talk to them in advance about it. If it's like a set piece where you know it's going to happen, sort of let them know that it's obviously not anything malicious on the part of the GM, but by the same token, if it does happen, I'm not going to pull any punches just because it's player characters, and also try and find out from them, if the worst happens, what are they going to be all right? You know, if you've got younger players, like you were saying, and what do they want to do next, you know?
Yeah, I think people do particularly get attached to their first characters as well, because when you lose your first character, it is a completely new experience, so it can be a lot more upsetting. But again, the group you've got, I think, are all experienced enough role players to be fine with it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a phrase where I work, and I feel a little bit like my soul's dying as I say this, but there's a phrase where it's like managing customer expectations. But and all that basically means, for those who aren't initiated in the exciting world of business speak, is that if you're handling a problem for someone and you find out you can't deal with it straight away, if you go back to that person and you say, oh, look, sorry, I am looking at this, I'll keep you updated, it's maybe going to take a bit longer than I expected, most people are fine with that. However, if you don't tell them and keep them updated, they'll get really annoyed because they don't know what to expect. Whereas if you manage their expectations and say, oh, it's going to take me a couple of days to get around to it, most people are fine. So I think it's similar when, you know, you're trying to prepare people for this. So if you're sort of saying to them, like, look, guys, it potentially is lethal, we could lose a character or two, or maybe even a TPK here. If it does happen, they were sort of forewarned, they know it's going to happen, so, and they can't really go, oh, well, I wasn't expecting it to be that lethal. If you've said to them, like, it's lethal, it could be a TPK, you've sort of set the bar for that sort of scenario, and then it's just a matter of, like I say, working out if the worst does happen, and hopefully it won't, you know. They might say, I might get shite rolls like I normally do, and they might sail through the encounter and be like, oh, I don't know what John was talking about, so that's a piece of piss. But if the worst does happen, at least they're prepared for it, and the shock's lessened a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's it for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. We'd love to hear what you have to say on the subject. And if you want to leave us a voicemail, you can do so using the SpeakPipe link in the description of this episode. We'll perhaps feature your voicemail in a future episode and respond to it like we did with Jeff's at the start of this episode. So anyway, hopefully we'll see you next time. And until we do, take care, stay safe, and whenever you're playing, have fun.